Hey guys, how are we? Excited to be here with Brett Diamond today. We are continuing our discussion from the Pro Esports Teams and Organizations panel at the last Esports Next conference. The next one is coming up, by the way, August 22nd to 24th, so check that out. Brett, how you doing today?
Good to be here, Charles. How are you?
Good. Always good to see you. Last time I saw you was at the Call of Duty event, the kickoff event.
Yeah.
I guess let's just jump right into it. How do you feel about the first event of the season, and how do you feel about the team right now?
Yeah, we're first of all, it's just excited that the season is here, right? I think like anything else, there's so much lead up to to any competitive season that the anticipation is building and building, and it was fun to have that kickoff event in Dallas a few weeks ago. We had the start of the online qualifiers. 2 weekends ago, we had an awesome watch party with 100 fans packed into a theater in Minneapolis. So we're just pumped that the season is here for Call of Duty and Rocker. And our other teams are, Valorant season just kicked off as well. Version 1 is looking really strong, our Valorant team. The Version 1 Rocket League team is mid-season at full sprint. So a lot going on, but it's exciting. All our teams are, we feel pretty good about all the teams, and looking forward to seeing them play.
So for you personally, I guess, coming from very much a traditional sports background, being with the league, I believe you said you've worked 12 Super Bowls.
Yep.
So how's the transition been? And I know you get this question all the time, but from traditional to esports, and are you settling in okay?
Yeah, it has certainly been an interesting 2.5 years. For those who aren't aware, I was with the NFL at the league level for 11 years, worked a total of 12 Super Bowls, then came to the Vikings in 2016 for a few years before I shifted over to run the esports organization as the first employee. So it's been a full sprint every step along the way, but it's been exciting. When we started this, whether it was myself or our ownership group, the Will family owns the Vikings, as well as Gary V. We weren't coming into it thinking that we had all the answers for esports just because we had some experience and some success in traditional sports. We really wanted to take our time, listen, learn. Since then, and that was almost, it was 2.5 years ago. So it's been, an eternity in many ways. We've hired an amazing staff. We're up to 30 full-time staff, plus players and coaches. Wow. We've hired incredible people that come from the esports world, a few from the traditional sports world, a lot of people that came from outside of either and are bringing an interesting, fresh perspective. And, where we've seen the most success as a business and as an organization is when we're finding a way to bring all those ideas together. And it's not about like changing how esports has been done, but bringing ideas from the collective experience of everyone we have as a part of the team, and seeing where we can improve things, where we can level up. And at the end of the day, it's just about creating awesome experiences for fans, whether they're at in-person events, which we're excited to get back to, or in social, or anywhere in between.
Yeah, I remember the Call of Duty kickoff event fondly at the Armory, because you guys threw honestly one hell of an event there, and it was awesome. There's also an unbelievable burger place in Minneapolis I believe it's called Parlor. It's rated like one of the best burgers in the country.
Absolutely. And a lot of the success we had with that kickoff event for CDL 2 years ago, it was really taking things that, whether others on our staff or myself personally had seen and been a part of with the Super Bowl and other big events, and not just like plopping it down and saying, okay, we do it exactly the same way. It's definitely going to work here. Also, for some of those events, those things can cost a lot of money to put on. But thinking about what's the esports spin on something that's really cool, that's worked, that's worked in traditional sports. And to give you an example, so we're scheduled to host the second major of the CDL season. We're still working out a few details. We'll probably have some announcements on that coming up soon. But we're scheduled.
I think that's breaking news right now. I think.
Well, yeah. So there's a few details we're still ironing out. So we'll have some official details that we're putting out this week. But we're really excited about it. To give you an example, one of the things that's been successful at the Super Bowl for years is they have Radio Row, where radio stations from around the country come and set up shop and broadcast. We want to create Podcast Row at our major, where invite content creators and podcasts of all sizes come to our major, be a part of it, set up shop, broadcast from there, bring in guests. So that's just one example of taking something where we've seen something from traditional sports, thinking about how can that work? How can that be adapted to what we're doing here?
And I think like the hospitality aspect of it, you guys nailed. So the tournament was great. I think the amateur play was great. And there was some concern about that, right? Like leading up to it. And people thought they'd be freezing in like a parking garage. And that wasn't the case. It was a great tournament.
I mean, that's honestly, that's one of my favorite stories to reminisce about from that weekend where, we had this amazing venue in the Armory. Unfortunately, the Armory wasn't available for this next event that we're looking at hosting. And they have a parking garage that's directly under this amazing event venue. And they use it for all kinds. They use it for concerts. Like when they have a big concert there, sometimes there'll be like a secondary stage for the concert in this parking garage. So they program it for events. And I've been a part of events, at the NFL and other places where you're making creative use of spaces. So we spent months planning what that Challengers event would be in the Armory parking garage. And when some pictures got out the day before the event of people are freaking out. Oh, it's in a garage. It's January in Minnesota. People are going to freeze. We're kind of laughing to ourselves because number one, we had confidence that it was going to be a good setup and a great experience first and foremost for the competitors who are there. That's always has to be the highest priority. But we also knew it was not going to be cold. If anything, we were worried about it being hot. Once we had, it's number one, it was heated. Number two, you're going to get a lot of people in there. And so like, there's all this chatter, building on Twitter and Reddit. And eventually we just tweeted out,
I remember
it's heated. That was it. And that was our PR strategy in response. It's heated.
Yeah. That's all you got a team together, all 30, you put your heads together and go, let's just tell them we have a heater.
Yeah. Yeah. But, that's, all joking aside, that was a cool part of the event. And really, we, personally, I think the amateur scene around all the titles we're in, but particularly Call of Duty, is really important. And so we're thinking a lot about how we can support that, both with our event, at the end of the month, as well as other things that we have going. By saying at the end of the month, it's March 31st through April 3rd is the date of CDL Major 2.
And let's talk about the amateur scene. You guys just picked up a roster from Spain.
Yeah.
Which I've heard is not near Minnesota. So I looked at a map and everything, and I was like, that's not even very close. So what prompted Spain? Why Spain? Tell me about European expansion.
Yeah. So it was interesting. The decision actually originated, or the conversation originated with our coaches, because they were, we have some of our, I would say our coaching staff is some of the best at identifying up and coming amateur talent. They genuinely follow the challenger scene. Obviously, Standy came into our roster partway through last season and had an immediate impact and is a top player in the league. So our coaches have been keeping an eye on who they thought would be a good fit for the organization, whether in sub roles or signing an amateur team. And ultimately, this was the team they identified, and they're not just that. They're looking not just in North America, but in the international challenger scene for those up and coming players. Now, for us from a business side, obviously, having a roster that's based in Spain opens up certain opportunities, and we're still looking at exactly what that entails. But it was a really fascinating internal discussion because it started very much as the right thing to do from a competitive standpoint and recommended by our coaches. And then from there, it becomes, okay, how can we use this to show support for the amateur scene and the challenger scene, which is frankly underappreciated and undersupported broadly.
100% agree.
And then thinking about how do we use this as an opportunity to plant a flag in an important market in Europe that hasn't in the past, hasn't since CDL, there hasn't been much engagement with Spain specifically. Obviously, there's a franchise in Paris and in London. But I think it's we're really excited about where that can take it, and we're thinking about things like Spanish language co-streams of rocker matches, and still working on some of those details. And the timing is unclear when we'll have those up and running. But those are things we're thinking about now that we have this team and we planted a flag, so to speak.
Is there a plan to bring those guys over here to practice against the main guys coming up here?
Yeah, so they're going to stay in Spain and compete in the EU challenger scene. We do want to look for opportunities to bring them over here to compete in the open events when they take place. So still figuring out exactly when and what that schedule looks like for them and for us. But it's definitely, we definitely intend to see them on the shores of North America at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later.
I love that story. I love that you found the most talented guys you thought probably in the world, and then you were like, let's go for talent and figure out how to work around it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that's really a lot of what we do here starts with how can we be competitive and how do we support the competitive side of the organization as much as possible. Like day-to-day, my responsibility is building the business side. We have great leadership in our coaches and Jake Troba, who was just promoted to VP of Esports and Acquisitions, who oversees all our competitive rosters. And this is a good example of where the coaches identified something they wanted to do from a competitive standpoint, and now we're thinking about, okay, how do we build around that from a fan engagement and a business side, and just create something cool to be a part of.
Yeah. So one thing that I think you've done incredibly well, actually, in that example you just gave, promoting from within. If you're a player, basically back in the complexity days, right, and 18 years ago in esports, if you were a player, when you were done playing, you had given up potentially some of your college time. So you either went back to school or you went to a job that you didn't really care about because there weren't esports roles. Like, these weren't opportunities that existed. And now that there are opportunities for pro players to move on to careers in gaming, how important is it for you to promote from within if, say, one of your better players says, hey, I want to hang up the controller, but I still want to be part of the family?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I believe is important for us as an organization and in the industry as a whole. And now that we're kind of in, for so many organizations, certainly us included, now that we're in, everyone has a different opinion on what post-pandemic means, but, now that we're in a situation where we have our players for several teams in Minnesota, it opens the opportunity to engage with them in a different way and think about how can we help set them up for success. And, when we have players that express an interest in learning about the business side, we want to make sure we provide those opportunities, whether it starts with, something as simple as, we brought some more players in for more feedback on, some of the things we're doing from a branding standpoint and a social voice standpoint. And, we have, some of our players have enormous personal brands. And so, first of all, it's extremely beneficial to the organization to tap into that as a resource. And if that helps set players up for, to be thinking about what they want to do when they're done competing, that's really important. There's the potential for a natural transition along the way. And, I think that's something that traditional sports has developed over time, our support structures for the players, for the coaches, and career development opportunities. And we're just, I want to be clear, like, we're just scratching the surface of that, but it is something that's important to us as an organization that we want to build up. In the case of Jake, who I mentioned, he came to us, he joined the organization as an assistant coach for Rocker in our first season. But right out of the gate, he has an amazing background where he was a COD pro and then retired to go to college and was working on Wall Street for a couple of years before he came out of COD retirement to help coach.
What a unique story, by the way.
Yeah. Amazing.
What a crazy unique story.
Yeah. And so, even that first year when he joined us as an assistant coach and analyst, that he had potential to do a lot more. And even, within that first year, we were tapping into Jake as we were looking at the expansion into Rocket League. And really, when we were looking into expanding into Valorant for version 1 a little over a year ago, that's when Jake really took that next step and recruited that Valorant roster and started to take on, these GM responsibilities. And, his promotion that we announced recently was really the formalization of a role that he had been growing into really since the day he joined the organization. So, he's an incredible part of everything we're doing here across both the competitive and the business side.
Yeah, and I think it's hugely important to be able to have those opportunities now that I guess early teams didn't have because the budget simply wasn't there. Because if you have a good person or a good player, keeping them with you in any capacity is hugely important.
Yeah.
Do you think that's something that you brought over from the Vikings culture, or is that, particular to version 1?
I think it's a little bit of both. At the end of the day, I think it's the combination of the right thing to do for the players and the individuals and the scene as a whole. But I also think it's smart from a business standpoint, because if if as an organization you're known for providing those opportunities, and like I said, like, talk is cheap, right? We want to make sure we're actually providing those opportunities for our players on all our teams over time. But if you do those things the right way and you approach those things the right way, you build a solid reputation, and you want to create an environment that players want to play for you, that they understand that they're going to be well taken care of and well looked after. And there are traditional sports teams that do those things very well. There are traditional sports teams that don't do those things as well.
Right.
Totally. Personally, I think the Vikings are one that do those things very well. And we're looking to emulate that, where it makes sense.
Yeah. And I think anyone trying to walk away from this chat with any sort of business insight, take care of your people. Right. Mm-hmm. It's a really simple concept that some people fail to grasp, and in companies that take care of their people, no matter what industry they're in, it goes a long way.
Yeah. We talked a lot about the player angle and, and Jake's progression specifically. But we've hired 30 people on the business side, and content and marketing over the last 2+ years. And we've hired some incredible people from, a lot of different backgrounds. A pretty high percentage of everybody we've hired has either been promoted, taken on additional responsibility. That's something that we do think a lot about. And, anytime you're hiring that many people that fast, it's a pretty crazy ramp up. So we spend a lot of time
kind of building the plane as you fly it. So to
speak. Yes, that is yes. We use that. That metaphor is very commonly used in this office.
Hey man, it's esports, where I think we kind of all are on some level, and that's what's so fun about it, right? Like, if you break something, you're like, well, that didn't work. Let's try it a different way.
Yeah. It's that is absolutely true. I was talking with a few former colleagues from the NFL. I was at the Super Bowl this past weekend. I didn't actually go to the game, but I was in LA for some meetings.
What number Super Bowl is that for you, by the way?
Well, I didn't actually I wasn't involved in the planning. Well, so interesting story. So. That would have been the 14th that I've been at.
Wow.
It was actually the last Super Bowl that I had that I touched in any way from a planning capacity, which shows how far in advance the NFL plans these things, because I left the NFL in 2016. And
oh, wow.
And one of the last big projects that I worked on before I left was the Super Bowl bid process, which I've been involved in for several years, that awarded the Super Bowls for several years up to this one with LA. And then I was on one planning trip, early planning in 2016 for the LA Super Bowl. So this was sort of an interesting kind of closure and turning the page for me personally, that this was cool. The last Super Bowl that I touched in any form or had any, very minor, but, any involvement in while I still worked there. But it's crazy that was 6 years ago. And that's, where out they plan these things. I'm just happy if we know who we play, now. I'm just happy if we have a schedule for next month. I'll take that.
Right. Esports a little different in that regard.
Yeah, but like you said, that's the fun part. That is definitely the fun part.
How does having secured the next CDL major after the one coming up in Texas and being part of the Super Bowl bid process, can you walk us through similarities there and things that are just drastically different that esports could learn from the professional environment?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that are similar. Like, the basic building blocks are the same, right? You need a venue, you need hotels, you need to create an awesome fan experience. And if you kind of start with those core elements. Now, in that example, you have the Super Bowl, you have the Olympics, the World Cup, the biggest events in the world that are planning 5 years, 7 years, sometimes decade, literally 10 years ahead in the case of Olympics and sometimes the World Cup. One of the things that I'd love to see the esports industry advance on is setting your structure, the league structure, setting the schedule further in advance. And, we're not at just a very real example. We're not at the Armory this year. because it wasn't available by the time CDL set the schedule. We're excited about the venue that we're close to announcing in the coming days. So stay tuned.
He almost said it. He almost said it.
I almost said it. You almost got me. So we're really excited about the experience we're going to create with CDL Major 2. But anytime you're doing things at the last minute, you're potentially limiting your options in certain areas, and you just have less runway to kind of do cool things and create a unique event.
Yeah, certainly from our perspective at the Switch, providing connectivity for events like the PGA, where we get the schedule a year in advance, versus esports, where we have like a 3-week heads up of where the venue is going to be. We can somehow get it done, but I always hear, why don't they plan these things sooner? And I'm like, look, man, I just work here. I don't know what you want me to tell you. But I think that's both the exciting thing about esports is we can get an entire event together in 3 weeks and pull it off and have it be incredibly successful. And something we should probably work on. Right? Let's be honest.
Yeah. It's funny. That's something we've been talking about internally with our staff. So much had just been an absolute full sprint. Started the organization in the summer of 2019, had to develop, a brand for Rocker. It didn't exist at that point. And then obviously COVID hits, that, throws everybody into just an absolutely unprecedented situation in all of our lives. But we're trying as an organization to kind of mature to the point where, you don't want the building to be on fire all the time. Like you need to, you need to be ready to, okay, we're going to host a CDL major. We've got, potentially 2 teams, if they qualify, the Rocket League and the Valorant team could be going to international events in that same time window. So there's a lot going on. And so you need to be ready to, to put you got to be ready to fight the fire when you need to, but you don't want to constantly be in that fire drill, right? You got to, you want to mature as an organization so you can start thinking more than, a couple months ahead, be a little more strategic in what you're trying to accomplish. And that's true of any startup, right? You have to find the balance between, what you need to accomplish day to day, and then what you're trying to build towards long term. Also fun.
And I think talking about, current esports moves, I think that's one of the reasons Envy took over the rights for Esports Stadium Arlington.
Yeah.
So if they could come in last minute and make a bid for something, they have a venue to do it. What are your plans for sort of a permanent venue, and how important is that in your current timeline?
Yeah. So the Will family, who owns the Vikings and owns the Will family owns almost 200 acres in Eagan, Minnesota, and the Vikings facility sits on that. We're in a different building, but the building that we're in sits on that property. They just opened an amazing hotel. There's a residential area. So it's a really awesome campus. The group that runs the real estate here has been evaluating what it would look like to open an arena on this campus. I mean, that would be several years away, and it's something we've talked about publicly in the past. Esports would need to be one piece in a much bigger puzzle. Like economically, if you're going to invest in a venue, you have to have a lot that goes into it. The situation, what they have with Esports Stadium Arlington, I think is amazing. Both like the original concept of redeveloping a portion of an existing convention center, as well as Envy taking control of that. It certainly makes I don't have any insight into Envy's into their situation specifically, but it's not hard to imagine that the economics of hosting those events become significantly better if you own the venue. And they're expensive events to put on, and you want to try to do it in a way where you're creating this amazing experience. It's not cheap to do that. But you also want to keep your ticket prices reasonable so that, you're not pricing out your fans. And, that's a tight line to walk at times.
Yeah. And I don't think people realize, if they've never been to a live event, these are $1 million productions, right? And people think it's a bunch of people and like a hotel convention center. And it was 50. I was there when it was that. And these are not that anymore. And I promise you, these are big deal productions. I guess shifting gears 180 degrees here to big acquisitions in the current market, how can we not talk about the Microsoft Blizzard deal? I guess, what are your initial thoughts on that, and how does it affect you guys as a team, if at all?
Yeah, first of all, very excited by the news. The idea, we're in this for the long term, right? And when we think about what we're building and what that looks like over the course of the next, not just in 2022, but in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years beyond, having a partner like Microsoft is really exciting. We're big fans of what they're doing with Halo and the investments they're making there. So overall, to me, it's positive, and we're excited to see what comes of it. Now, that's long term. In the short term, it really doesn't impact anything we're doing this year, right? What they've said publicly is they expect that that transaction to not close and be formally approved until I think they said June 2023. So we're talking about a ways down the road before that transaction is even completed. And then there's probably an onboarding process. So, a lot of that are things that, that we don't have a ton of direct insight into. But, there's not, we're not going to see immediate changes for Call of Duty League or anything we're involved in. But overall, really excited about the trajectory and what that brings long term.
And I think a large part of that acquisition is Microsoft buying talent, right, to create metaverse projects. Obviously a buzzword. We couldn't go through an entire fireside without mentioning metaverse. But game designers have been building metaverses for 25, 30 years. So if you're going to go build virtual worlds, go get the smartest people to already do it.
Yeah.
And then have them build out everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are elements to that where, we're in many ways, we're observers like anyone else in the industry, and watching with a keen interest in how certain things develop. Metaverse is a huge buzzword. I think a lot of people don't necessarily know exactly what that means or what that's going to entail.
Right.
But we're certainly keeping an eye on.
We use it a lot, though, right?
Yeah. Yes, it's used all the time. And I think another thing that that acquisition said to me was how much value there is on the Activision Blizzard IP, right? And Call of Duty, Call of Duty is still one of the highest selling games every year, and whether this year's game holds up to that, it's too soon to tell. But Cold War was, I think, the number one selling game last year. Modern Warfare definitely was the year before. And so clearly, obviously in a transaction that big, the esports part of it is a pretty small piece in a, $78 billion puzzle or whatever that number is for the acquisition. But clearly there's enormous value and opportunity that Microsoft sees in bringing, everything into the fold. Yeah. That is a big number.
It's a big number, but I mean, kind of like the valuations of esports teams, right? There's some betting on futures here that I think people need to take into account.
Yeah.
What is your current thought, or what are your current thoughts, I suppose, on current team valuations? Do you feel like these are numbers that people will be able to live up to, or do you think right now they're a little high?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say without having more insight than I do. I mean, I'll read anything that gets that's out there. Some of the things that are public with with public, either the orgs that are publicly traded or what's put out there with some of the recent announcements. We don't really get too concerned when you have media that put franchise values on things. Those are even in traditional sports where there's a lot more data points to draw from. Those things are very much finger in the wind at best. We're about building for the long term, right? And that's one of the benefits we have of our ownership group with the Will family, as well as Gary V, where we're not focused on yes, we have budgets to hit and we have goals for 2022, 2023, but we're really thinking about what are we building towards in the future, right? This is I use this comparison a lot this weekend when I was seeing some of my old colleagues from the NFL, but this is the NFL in the 1920s, right? And there's so many, I'm an NFL history nerd. There's so many parallels, just even when you see kind of teams changing hands, franchise slots kind of shifting around. Like that stuff happened all the time in traditional sports, like way back when, and over time it stabilized and became the business behemoth that the NFL is today, or any of the other traditional sports leagues. So
I don't think the Broncos were worth $4 billion in the 20s, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, but
carry the two.
Yeah, but that's a real thing, right? Like you think about how much even over the last 20 years, MLS is kind of a good comparison from a business perspective, right? Like it wasn't that long ago that whether the media or fans referred to four major league sports in the US. Now nobody would say four, everybody says five, because MLS has grown to be a very real part of that conversation. And they've done an amazing, it's really impressive, with all the soccer specific stadiums that have been built and all those things. And that's over the course of, the last, 20 to 25 years, and huge growth over the last 10 years. So, for a lot of people that, that question the trajectory the esports industry's on, you gotta have a little bit of patience.
And I totally agree with you. I think those are great examples, and people that, at least my opinion, if people want valuations defended like right away, then they don't see the long-term vision. It's probably not the industry for them, right?
Yeah, it's fun though. Hey, it's fun to look at what's out there. And I will say, because this is, there are definitely esports organizations out there right now that, from a fan base perspective, have the scale of an NFL team.
100%.
That is not abstract when you look at, FaZe and 100 Thieves and Optic, and there's, certainly others. Just from a owned and operated digital platform perspective, those organizations have the scale right now that an NFL team does, outside of the NFL broadcast, which is obviously what's reaching, millions and millions of viewers. But in terms of what a team owns and operates and monetizes outside of a league structure, there are esports teams today that have the same level of followers and audience size that an NFL team does. Long term, the right now that's, a small handful, rather than, in the NFL, all 32 teams have that scale. And that's obviously what organizations like ours that have only been around for a couple of years, we're all chasing, chasing the big fish in the pond. But
and I think the numbers came out for the Super Bowl today, and like 101.1 million views. But their content videos out there for pro esports teams that get obviously in the mid millions views. So it's not like it's so far away that it's unrealistic.
Yeah. Oh yeah. If you look at the views that, that 100 Thieves, FaZe, that those types of organizations are getting on, just if you look at their YouTube channel, and then you look at any NFL team's YouTube channel, the number of views per video is not radically different.
Right.
You're not getting 100 million people watching a single esports match yet, but we got 100 years to catch up to the NFL.
Exactly. So if you look at the rate of growth, I think esports is certainly winning there.
Yeah.
Another thing that you guys do incredibly well at Version 1, and I think deserves to be recognized and applauded, is your work with women in esports, between your platform Visionaries and Version X. And I just kind of want to give you a second to maybe talk about that, because I find it awesome and inspiring, and I think people should know about it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It's a space that we think is really important to support, and we're really excited about what we've started to build there. So back in September, we announced that we had signed a women's Valorant team that plays as Version X. Their season is starting up in a couple of weeks. We're really pumped to see those players. They're a competitive team that's a part of this organization, just like any of the other teams, right? 4 of the 5 players live in Minnesota. They're in the same housing as the COD team, and some of the Valorant guys live here, and Com on the Rocket League team lives here. They're in the same housing complex. They have a scrim room in the practice facility. They're in here every day practicing. We want to give them the same access to resources that any of our other teams have, and that's really important. Visionaries is our platform that we created to support women in gaming and the women's esports scene at all levels. We've done some big tournaments, 50K prize pool tournament for Warzone, biggest Warzone women's tournament that's ever taken place, and we've done tournaments in Valorant, tournaments in or we're planning a tournament in Rocket League. So we're trying to just create more at all levels. We have Jessica Geese does a great job of running community tournaments through our Visionaries platform. So we're really excited about it. And at its foundation, getting back to version X and the women's Valorant scene, Riot has done an incredible job building a structure around a women's league that makes it easy for organizations that want to get involved, right? They have broadcasts that they put a lot of investment in. There's very real viewership there. The average salary for most of the women's Valorant teams, I think, we don't have insight into what every team pays, but I believe they're higher than the average salary in women's professional soccer and women's professional hockey, which, frankly, might be a commentary on those sports don't pay enough. But right. But I think in the case of when we signed version X, it was important to us that they were compensated fairly, that they had the opportunity to quit their day jobs and focus full time on being esports competitors, because that's what we brought them in the organization to do. And honestly, just like any of our other teams, winning brings relevancy, and they're here to compete and they're here to win. It's really and one of the things we talked about internally was when we were considering signing the team was if we weren't going to be living and dying with their wins and losses just like any other team that we sign, and that's true of any title we're going to get into, we're not going to sign a team unless we're ready to support it with, whether, provide the support the team needs and support, yelling at the screen while the match is going on.
And you need some developer support there too, right? I mean,
yeah.
Hugely important.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, not in any facet of the esports industry, it doesn't move without the developer support. It has to start there. And Riot has done an incredible job of building that foundation with their Game Changers program.
Very cool. I remember, as a former team owner, my goal was always a world championship. Like, I will figure everything else out, the content, the personality, just win. If you win a world championship, I can figure everything else out. And then different teams take different strategies, but it seems at version 1, winning championships is number one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at its core, we're all very competitive people. So we want to win. And when our teams are playing, I mean, we're, it's, one of our new employees who's been hired since last, really in kind of a gap where we didn't have many teams playing, was talking to me right before we had a big watch party, which I mentioned earlier, for the first Rocket match of the season. We rented a movie theater. We got 100 people in there. The fans are pumped up. And about 10 minutes before the match, I start to get pretty intense when I'm going to watch. And so one of our new staff was talking to me, and I just had to politely say, listen, I apologize. I'm about to, you're about to see a side of me you don't normally see on a day-to-day basis.
Things are going to get a little dark.
Yeah, I'm about to get a little intense. But yeah, to your point, winning brings relevancy. I think that's true in any competitive environment, traditional sports, esports, whatever it is. And, we hustle, we hustle constantly on the business and the marketing and the content side to do creative new things. But at the end of the day, winning is the fuel that drives the rocket engine, right?
And I think we had a question from the audience. Do you think esports has a more traditional sports model? Is it more similar to lifestyle branding? Happy to have you answer that. I guess my thoughts are each team approaches it differently, right? I think more teams are akin to lifestyle brands, and more teams are akin to pro sports teams, and it just depends how you want to tackle it. But
I think you're right. I mean, every team is a little bit different in that regard. That's certainly true. The way I describe esports, particularly when I'm talking to a brand that isn't familiar with it, is that a partnership with an esports team is essentially a hybrid between a traditional sports partnership and influencer marketing, where you're going to have, again, if I'm talking to a brand that, that isn't familiar with the space, you're going to have elements of a traditional sports partnership that look and feel very familiar. It's a little bit different spin, but you've got brand placements and social and on as a part of broadcasts and branded content and all of those things. But then the power of the esports personalities is enormous, right? Like the 4 players on our roster roster have larger social media following than the top 4 followed Vikings players. Like that is
about that, guys.
Yeah,
everybody watching, listen to that.
Yes. Yeah. If there's one takeaway to anybody, if somebody's watching that isn't that familiar with the esports space, it's that, right?
Now, do you tell your Vikings colleagues that all the time? Do you
remember absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Well, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to touch on? Because I, obviously want to cede the floor to you, and I really do appreciate your time. Always fun to catch up with you.
No, I mean, great to connect with you as well. I don't think we missed anything specific. I don't know if there are any other questions from the chat that we want to get to. I wasn't keeping an eye on it, but happy to take questions if anybody out there has any.
I've been trying to chat, but I got lost in your eyes for a minute there, so it took me away from the chat. Brett, thank you for your time. Amazing things that you're doing over at Version 1. Thank you, ESTA, for having us. The next ESTA conference is August 22nd. Discounted tickets are on sale now for the pre-sale. It was a great time last year, and Brett and I met up in Chicago, and it's in Chicago again, worth mentioning. So hopefully we'll see a lot of people in person there, and look forward to your CDL major March 31st.
Sounds good. Thanks, Charles. Great to be here.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.